Hi, and welcome to the Vet Story Podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about the business side of veterinary medicine. You know, the stuff they didn't teach you in school. We focus on what really moves the needle, from metrics, leadership, culture, and the decisions that makes running a practice easier. I'm your host, Reece Generelli. I am a multi-practice site owner and the founder of Innovative Veterinary Management Solutions. My purpose is simple: to help practice owners move from the business operator category to the business owners category. And with that, let's get started. And we are back with another episode of the Vet Story Podcast. I'm joined with Dr. Jennifer Edwards. How you doing, Jennifer?
I am doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm well. I'm always good when I see your beautiful smile. Now, for those who can't see this, Jen, she has this aura that when she does smile, you instantly feel warm and safe. That's probably something that I love about Jen. She has this aura. But how you doing, Jen?
I am fantastic. I'm very excited because we're finally getting some spring here in New England.
Well, I'm in Vancouver and we rain 9 months of the year and we're getting some sun too, so we're good. Thank you for joining me today. It's been a long time coming. Let's tell the audience a little bit about you, what you do, where you came from.
As you mentioned, I am a veterinarian and I have been in this profession for a very long time, over 2.5 decades. And I spent 13 years of that time as a practice owner.
Hang on, let's stop you there. You said 2.5 decades?
Yeah.
So you started when you were 10? If you guys
I
don't know,
did.
she looks 30. 35, maybe pushing it.
Well, you know, I'm one of those kids graduated from vet school when I was 12 and a half, so it all works. I've been around. I've done a lot of different things inside of vet med, relief work, emergency work, urgent care work, mostly focused on small animal. And about 6 years ago, just over 6 years now, I sold my practice and decided to pursue my other passion in life. And that is my interest and fascination with us as humans and the way our minds work and the garbage that runs in the background, you know, dictating the way we act and the way we behave and what keeps us from getting what we want and why we're often so frustrated or can't control our emotions. It's really fascinating how similar we all are, yet so different at the same time. And so now I am a conscious leadership coach and professional speaker and team developer, and I help people uncover all of that so they can create what they want to create.
What is conscious leadership?
So conscious leadership has a lot of different definitions if you were to go look it up online. But basically, in a nutshell, what it means is, I call it a style of leadership. It's more of like a context from which to lead. And that includes self-leadership, by the way. So really, it doesn't matter who's listening right now, this applies to you. And basically, it's a context from which to lead, from which to operate, how to show up, how to communicate, an intentionality behind it. There's awareness of yourself, awareness of others, being present, being mindful, being in whatever way is applicable, a stand for other people to grow and develop and step into their own greatness, in whatever capacity they can. So it's really, I guess, in a nutshell, about intentionality, mindfulness, and awareness. And when that comes into leadership, everything changes.
It sounds a little Kumbaya-ish. Is that what it is, Jen?
Well, it depends on your perspective, but no, because really, if you're human, it applies. So a person may not be aware that it applies, and they may not want to be aware, which is totally okay. We're all different. But the way I see it, from my perspective, it's not kumbaya. It is the functioning of the human mind, the human brain, the human spirit.
It sounds Kumbaya-ish. It sounds like we all sit in a circle and we talk about our feelings and we decide whether or not we can go to work today. That's what it sounds like to me. Is that, come on, be honest.
Well, and Reece, it makes perfect sense from your perspective that you would see it that way. However, for a lot of
I'm listening,
us,
yes. I'm listening.
see it, some of what you said is actually true. but not in the way you described it. So, no, we're not all sitting in a circle singing songs. Although there are times at staff meetings where maybe people do sit in circles and share feelings.
They're called
Because
cults.
now it depends on how you define a cult. So, the culture that is vet med is a unique one. And when we all sit in circles and share our feelings, that's actually really healthy. And one of the problems right now in vet med, and the reason so many people are struggling and burning out, is because it's a very emotionally charged profession. And yet, there isn't a lot of space to express and feel those emotions in a healthy manner. So maybe we need to bring more circle feeling sharing into our practices.
Ooh, all right. So let's touch on something. Now, I'm not saying that I'm old. I mean, I do look 21. I'm not gonna lie. Forget the salt and pepper look on my beard here, but I come from a background. You go to work, you do your job, do it as best as you can. You get feedback, you do better, and all that kind of jazz. Now, do we talk about our feelings? Maybe we need to do different communication. Sure, that I agree. But I feel like we're breeding a different team, a different veterinarian that is coming through. Like they're asking some unusual requests. I feel like we're expected to accommodate feelings.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways to look at that, right? So, discussions about generational differences and the way newer people are seeing things as they come out of school versus the way people in the past have seen things, that's a whole nother conversation. When it comes to how leadership responds to that, I would say that everything you described about how the way things used to be still applies. People get up, they get dressed, they go to work, they do their job, they get paid, they're done, they go home. They get feedback, hopefully they take that and improve, and they move on. But there's so much to that story that's missing. And what's missing when we say it like that is the experience of the person inside of their career, how they are showing up and impacting others, how others are showing up and impacting them, how they feel, how their resilience, their health, both physical and mental. And the way leadership approaches certain requests from new veterinarians is going to vary depending on what the requests are, how they do or do not fit with the practice model's approach. And some of them will be accommodated and some of them won't. So, conscious leadership is not about babying and it's not about accommodating everything and just saying yes and setting no boundaries. In fact, leaders who function that way often struggle because I learned personally firsthand nicing your way through leadership actually doesn't work. And part of conscious leadership is about setting boundaries, setting parameters, but in a context of what works for the business and what works for the team and what works for the clients, all of it together. And so being able to have that discernment and operate with kindness and compassion while still at times saying no and still at times setting those boundaries for what's going to work and what's not.
I'm not pausing for dramatic effect. I'm thinking about what you've just said and how I guess I lead with my team. There are certain things that I don't do that I give to somebody else because I don't have the capacity or the emotional or EQ to support. Is there such thing as unreasonable requests?
I will offer a different context on that. So, there are requests that are appropriate for certain situations and requests that may or may not be appropriate. Again, the people involved, the situation is going to vary and somewhat dictate whether or not we can say that's really a judgment, something is appropriate or not for a given moment. Unreasonable request. Now, that's a matter of opinion, and whose reasons are we going by? And one of my most favorite things that I ever learned, one of the most empowering things I ever learned many years ago, was about making unreasonable requests, which means requests outside of your reasons. So, very often people are actually held back from being a stand for themselves, standing up for themselves, asking for what they need, not just at work, but in life with their friends, their partners, their children, their families. And we have all these reasons why we shouldn't. Oh, I don't want to be a bother. Oh, women who are too loud or are annoying. Oh, I'm too demanding. Oh, this, that, like fill in the blank, a zillion reasons. And when we can actually step outside of reasons and start to intentionally be unreasonable, it's interesting because lots of possibility and opportunity starts to open up. But that's different from appropriateness. So, again, yes, I do think sometimes there are requests made that are not appropriate to be fulfilled, and that's a choice to be made.
Can these emotional, become toxic?
Well, it depends on what they are and how they are made.
I saw one on the forum recently where a doctor has requested a full-time position, but what her request is or was made it a part-time position. It was a 2 months on, 2 months off because she needs time to de-stress. How does anybody really accommodate that? Now, she doesn't want to be a relief vet. She wants to be an associate,
Okay.
but it doesn't really work. Well, I don't think it works. Tell me if it can, but I don't think it can work. With a practice that needs to support this DVM and hire additional team members to support that additional DVM, and then the scheduling around it. Is that a reasonable request?
Okay, so here's how I'm going to answer that. It is a reasonable request, and it is also very reasonable to not fulfill that request. So that doctor is entitled to want whatever he or she wants. And they have every right in the world to go around to practice after practice asking for it. And if a practice for some reason sees a way they can accommodate that, then great. But if a practice can't, then it's very reasonable for that practice to say, oh, that's an interesting idea. However, I'm sorry, but that doesn't fit into our business model. I wish you the best of luck. And if it takes 100 practices and the 101st practice for some reason is set up in a way that actually works because they have another doctor that wants to do the same thing on the opposite schedule, then great. And they may walk through life with that request and never find a job. That's also their prerogative. But the request itself isn't unreasonable. What's unreasonable is for someone on the other side to feel obligated to fulfill the request. They can decline that request in a kind and compassionate way. We don't have to judge it, and we don't have to accommodate it. So we can say, oh, actually, that's interesting. Good for you for trying to find what you want. That doesn't work here. Like, we're not going to be able to accommodate that, but good luck, and hopefully you find what you're looking for. Have a nice
Okay.
life. And off we go.
Well, that gives you some perspective for another thing that I was thinking about. Here's the other example. A doctor has explicitly said that after every appointment that has been completed, checked out, don't talk to me. I need to de-stress. I'm going to stay in my bubble, close the door until the next appointment. When my next appointment is here, just come to the door and just raise your hand, and that's when I would know the next appointment is here. How does that
Okay.
work in terms of culture? Because to me, that's a toxic culture. But you tell me otherwise. I'm here to be educated.
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to give a similar answer. And the term toxic also can have many different meanings. To me, the word toxic is depending on a context that people are experiencing. And if they're experiencing it in what they would consider to be a negative way, they call it toxic. And if it's not experienced in a negative way, then it's not toxic. You can have the exact same situation, and depending on the energy behind it, can determine whether it's toxic. So if the situation, like you just described, where a doctor has this particular need or request, is put into place in a way that's very collaborative, agreed upon, was communicated, and it has decided that that actually works for the flow of that practice, then it's not necessarily toxic. The staff might just know this is how we do it when Dr. So-and-so is working, and they walk by, they raise their hand with a smile, and she smiles or he smiles and waves back and comes out and sees the appointment, and then that might work for them. Again, it's one of those things that is not inherently bad or wrong. Where the problems arise is when somebody feels obligated to accommodate it in such a way that doesn't work for everyone else. And so there's anger, there's resentment, the flow doesn't work, or if that person doesn't get their request met, that they walk around and they're mad and they're, complaining and all of that. So again, requests are not inherently good, bad, toxic, not toxic. A lot of it is how they are communicated, how they are either granted or not granted, how that decision is received, the energy behind it, and all of that is really what makes something work or not work.
How can that, okay, if a doctor had said that, how does that help the communication within the hospital? We can't ask this doctor questions, follow-up questions, what if questions. How, where's that boundary? Now,
Yeah.
as long as it's spoken about in a nice way, let's just say, sure, it has. But I feel like you just said to me, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can be positive, but it could also be viewed as toxic. Is that what you just said to me?
Well,
Happy,
there's
loud.
something called toxic positivity, which is a whole another topic when people are inauthentically positive about everything, even to the point of wanting to bypass any emotion that is considered unpleasant.
Okay, so
But that's a different topic.
is it called poly?
Well, I've heard it called toxic positivity.
Okay, I thought it was called
So
poly positive.
when I say positive in a positive way, meaning that the person came in a nice way, made a request. The people heard the request. It was like, oh, that's kind of odd. I don't know if we could do that, but let's sit down. Let's talk about it. They talk about it. They troubleshoot. Here's how our flow works. Here's how communication works. Well, when would they ask you questions? When would they get clarification? What if they didn't know exactly what you wanted? How would they? And all that gets worked out. Again, it has to work. Now, pretend in this fictional practice that actually all got worked out. So now everybody agreed. This is how we're going to do it with Dr. So-and-so. They're going to go in the office so they can go into their little bubble emotionally for 10 minutes between appointments, and off they go. It's not necessarily inherently toxic for that person to make that request. The other part of it, too, is that it might not work for the practice. And then the leadership, and they sit down, they discuss it. There's just really no way to make that work. The staff need to be able to communicate with you between appointments. But then maybe take it a step further and say, given that we can't accommodate that the way you described it, what might be some other ways that we can support your need to emotionally reset? What might be ways that they can communicate with you that might work better for you than just bombarding you with a bunch of questions, right? So we may be able to get to an alternative plan that actually works for everyone that might not have such an impact on the practice. And the answer also could just be no, right?
Doesn't that also limit recruiting? Like, let's say we fix it today, it works for the practice today. Then we start to employ more people, and everyone looks at this and goes, "This is not normal. This is weird." Does that limit
Well,
recruiting?
potentially, there's a lot of things about practices that could limit recruiting. When somebody's looking for a job, they need to find a practice that's a fit. And if a team member walks into a practice looking for a job and learns that an accommodation, and again, we are talking about something that's very uncommon, but we're just going with this scenario.
Yeah,
If they find an
listen, I'm trying to
accommodation,
get to the point where I'm still on that boat of feelings and kumbaya and holding hands and talking about emotions. I'm still there. You
okay?
haven't put me off the life raft yet.
Well, if a team member walks into a practice and learns this is how our practice runs, we have these people, we have these policies, we have this flow, these are the types of things we do, and we have a particular doctor when that person sees appointments, this is the way we work with them. And if that completely turns off that new employee, but everybody else in the practice is okay with it, or even if not everybody else is in the practice is okay with it, but that's what it's been decided is going to happen, and they really have a problem with it, then maybe that's not the right practice for them. But yes, when we make choices, when we make decisions, there are impacts to that. And if leadership is going to agree to accommodate something that's out of the norm and has an impact, they also need to, in that moment, be agreeing to the consequences of that decision. And so they say, okay, well, this might turn off some new employees, but we're willing to take that chance in order to accommodate the doctor. Or they might say, you know what? This is just going to make everybody else jump through hoops around you. This doesn't work for a team environment. Let's find something else that will help you. So again, it's not necessarily right or wrong requests. It's about intentionally making choices that work or don't work, or not making choices that don't work, accommodating when you can, setting boundaries when you need to, but still being able to do that inside of a space of respect and kindness and compassion when we can do that. Not always possible.
I want to pick on something you just said.
All right, go ahead.
You said boundaries, which I get. Everyone has boundaries. But what I think I just heard you say, that life raft that we're talking about that can get me off, is that we can make those requests. Doesn't mean we have to say yes. But here's my next question. Does it make me an asshole if I say no? Because I'm not showing empathy or understanding or care about your feelings.
Well, it just all depends on whether you're an asshole. So when you say no, are you saying no with caring and respect and some empathy about their feelings? Or are you saying no without any of those things? If you're
All right, hang
saying
on.
no,
Here's my answer.
total. Okay.
No. Is that
Okay. So,
is
so
that
you,
is it my tone? Is that lack of empathy? Or is it with empathy? Or is it no? Or no? Which
okay.
one is it?
Empathy does not require coddling or baby talk. Empathy is a feeling, and feelings can be on the inside with no outward display. So,
Okay,
also
I got it.
being an
I
asshole,
understand that.
I'm gonna say one more thing. Being an
Hang on.
asshole can
Hang on.
also be on the inside with no outward display.
Okay, how about this? No, no, no.
Okay, now that's patronizing, condescending, and that is an asshole. So we're not doing that.
Okay, all right. You got me. All right. I'm not advocating for that.
Bringing consciousness and intentionality to decisions, to leadership, does not require babying and coddling and patronizing or even over explaining. It's thought out. I appreciate you making the request, but at this time, the answer to that is going to be no. Thank you. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. What's behind that is what makes the difference. It's the way that leader is showing up. It's the energy that they're bringing to their decisions, to the way they talk, the way they communicate the fact that the answer was no. You know what? We thought about it and it's actually not going to work for the practice. And the answer at this time is no, but thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Okay.
Right?
All right. So let's shift here. You work with a
Okay.
lot of independent practice owners or veterinarians.
I work with independent practice owners, and I also work with people in leadership position in corporates. So, for example, in my coaching work, I've worked with multiple medical directors, chief of staffs of corporate owned practices as well.
Okay. What do you normally see? Is it burnout? Is it stress level? Again, I'm telling you now, I'm not that person that talks about emotions. So, what is it that you normally see? And tell me about how you help.
So, I would say if I were to categorize the most common concerns that people come to want to grow inside of, a big thing is communication. However, a lot of times they don't realize at first that it is communication because what's often happening is that they feel stressed, overwhelmed, very alone. But also, as a leader, it's very easy to start to feel somewhat victimized in that, this is all air quotes, this is just like the story people are inside of. And I remember feeling this way too when I owned my practice, is that it's easy to start feeling like I just keep trying. I keep trying this for my team. I try to be nice. I try to do this. I try to give them that. I try. And no matter what I do, it's not good enough. No matter what I do, they complain about me. No matter how hard I try to accommodate, it's never enough. And so there can start to become this defeated feeling inside of leadership that really has people feel stuck because we can't see what we can't see. And that's why it's so important often to get outside help so that we can start to bring what is subconscious, what's there that we have no access to the forefront. Because once we see it, we're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so very often when I'm working with people, all of a sudden they have these aha moments where they're like, I never would have seen it like that, but oh my gosh, that makes perfect sense.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's part of the work I do with people is really helping them. Let me say one more thing, though. It's so important when we talk about, and part of the reason I'm so passionate about conscious leadership is there's really two completely separate buckets that are impacted by this. One bucket is the team, right? It's the impact when a leader is showing up with intentionality and mindfulness and presence and consideration and respect and collaboration, communication, all of those things. The impact on the team, the way the team functions, the way the practice flows, of course, is completely affected. And so it's the experience of the team inside of an environment when that's how leadership is showing up. It's a game changer. But what a lot of people don't stop to think about is the other bucket that's equally as important. And that bucket is the bucket that the leader themselves is sitting inside of. What is the leader's experience going to work every day? What is the leader's experience trying to lead the team? And when the leader has a terrible experience, when they themselves feel stuck, they don't know how to communicate, they feel attacked, they feel alone, they feel helpless, they also burn out as leaders, right? And we need good leaders. We need conscious leaders. So to me, there's this double benefit. When you raise the consciousness of leadership, you're not only impacting the team, but you're also now creating sustainability for the leaders themselves, which is just win-win in every direction.
That's interesting. I want to come back to what you said about the victim mentality. What I heard you say was if the owner doesn't have a strong practice manager or somebody else that can filter that noise, do they feel that it's only them, that they are alone and they just can't have the bandwidth to support the team because they try and try and try and it's just never good enough? And I would use the analogy of kids. You give them everything you want and they just still want more. They still want more. They're going to
Yep.
push that boundary. But is it because there is nobody else in between that team versus owner say, this is what we can and can't do? Is that a thing or is that something else?
I think that it really depends on the person, but there are a lot of leaders that I coach that actually do have managers, but they're still the leader. So even when you have a manager, and so you may have a buffer or somebody else to maybe handle these things, but then the manager comes to you and says, well, here's what they're saying, here's the complaints, what do you want me to do, or how do you want to handle this, and all of those things. Just having a person in between doesn't necessarily help. And then what about the manager? A manager is a leader as well.
So is that an empowerment issue?
In some ways, yes, but it also depends how you define empowerment. To me, true empowerment is when we have awareness, when we are truly empowered to make conscious, intentional choices that are not being driven by subconscious patterns and stories and beliefs and insecurities and all the things that us humans all have. I don't care who you are, you got them. When we can start to bring some of those things that are running the show into the forefront, we can start to bring more intentionality and awareness to our choices. We can start to have a say over these outcomes. We can start to understand why the team is perceiving us this way, no matter how hard we quote. So is it the truth? I would say, yes, it's the truth, because we all, in any moment, have our truth. But it is that person's truth with a lowercase t. It is not the truth with a capital T. And everything's only true until it's not. So when we start to do work and people start to see what they can't see, their truth starts to change. And the way they operate and the way they communicate and the way they do things starts to change. And then all of a sudden, this team that was never going to appreciate them starts to show some appreciation, because they start to see there was this back and forth dynamic that they had no idea was there. You start to approach that differently, everything changes.
How do they, from being a victim mentality to now having a team approach, from having the victim mentality and the team not appreciating to now the team is starting to see that? How do you make that connection?
Well, let's just differentiate something. There's something called a victim mentality. That would be something that is more pervasive, like a person who goes through life with a chronic, pervasive perspective of being a victim. That's different than situationally having the experience of being a victim. I mean, the term victim, again, because that word can be triggering for some people, but in this context, it's anytime that we feel that we are at the effect of something, circumstance, person, right? And so when we feel like I'm trying and they're still not appreciating me, it's like I'm at the effect of that lack of appreciation that's feeling like a victim. So it's different than somebody who's victim mentality. When people start to see that the story of that they're being a victim to their team is not necessarily the truth. It's not false, but it's also not true. It's just how they're experiencing it in the moment. We can start to unpack that. And when they start to see what's contributing to it, how they themselves are showing up, how they're interpreting things, things they're saying that are triggering responses from others that they think the other person's response actually was first, but it's actually not. Like, there's so many layers to it. But at the end of the day, all of a sudden they start to see, oh, I get it. So, yes, they're not appreciating me, but even though I'm trying to be nice, this is actually how it's landing. So it makes sense that they're responding that way. So there starts to become a level of ownership, a level of responsibility. Again, if a person is willing, no right or wrong, but any kind of personal work, coaching, therapy, no matter what it is, requires a level of being willing to engage and willing to take some ownership, because that's where empowerment comes from. It comes from inside here, not over there. So as soon as we're willing to look inside and point the finger back towards us, we are now empowered. And that's when things can start to change and our truth starts to change.
That's a great segue for my next question.
Okay.
When is there a realization that I am the problem? I am the toxic person in this practice, and you just happen to be the owner.
Well, let's unpack that for a moment, because part of the work that I do is around learning to actually release judgment, right? And starting to look from a place of energy and a place of what's working and what's not working, and starting to quiet the little voice in the head. Judgment towards other people is one thing. Judgment towards self is the big bad wolf. And part of my work is helping people to start to discern that voice. So it's not about an owner or a leader saying, I'm the toxic one, because that's just more judgment. But it's about having them start to realize, okay, this is how I've been showing up. That doesn't work. And now it makes sense. Given the impact of that, this is what I'm getting back from other people. That makes perfect sense. So now if I want to get a different result, I've got to back up the bus and I got to change what I'm doing, but I can't just change what I'm doing, because I got to back up the bus even further and I got to start to shift how I'm feeling. Well, I can't just change how I'm feeling. So I got to back up the bus even further and start to change how I'm thinking. And it all comes down to energy. And when people start to understand energy and can start to choose that consciously, they shift themselves in a moment. The energy is what determines their thoughts, which determines their feelings, which determines their actions, which determines their outcomes. And the problem is everybody tries to strong arm themselves into different behavior to get different outcomes, but it doesn't work. We have to back up the bus and go underneath what's driving it all. And when we do that, then yeah, that realization comes, but it doesn't come in those words. It comes in this sense of, oh crap, I've been a real jerk. And now I see it. And now there's an opportunity to not be a jerk anymore. And let's figure out what that looks like. And that's when things start to move.
So we're talking about the energy bus.
Well, The Energy Bus, which was a very good book by John Gordon,
Yes.
is a very great introduction to the idea. Yes, but
Yep.
the work that I do, it's kind of like a much deeper than that. But yes,
Do you know that?
there's actually several versions of that book.
I don't know, obviously, the main one and one for kids. I bought one for my child.
If kids can even start to understand that how they show up matters and that they actually have a say in it. Maybe not at first, but you can cultivate the ability to
Yeah.
have a say in it. But again, those things are easier said than done, right? And so people sit there like, well, I've been trying. You know, what I always say is everybody, quote, tries, try, and they end up with a different version of the same thing. They end up with a whole different team with different faces and different names. That's basically the same team that they had before, or a different boss. Same boss, different face, different name. It's different partner, same partner, different face, different name. So we keep ending up with different versions of the same thing in life. The common denominator really is the place to look, not from fault, not from blame, but from a place of empowerment. And because that's where change can be affected.
Yeah. Okay. This is a really good perspective. I mean, you're bringing me closer to the boats. What would you say to someone like me that, is still old school mentality that you get paid to do a job, you do a job? Now, I'm not saying that we don't talk about the expectations, because part of what I do is setting expectations, setting realistic expectations, and what does that measurement look like, what does done look like, all that kind of jazz. And I do have a communication part of things. I still feel not a big sharer in terms of feelings in the emotional state. Like, I feel that this went wrong. I feel that we could have done a bit differently here, but I'm struggling. I am emotionally distressed. I mean, maybe that's just because I'm a male. I don't know. And we don't share feelings. I'm the only male in my practices, and everyone shares their feelings. I'm not privy to those. But for someone like me, is like, that sound like an asshole. How does someone express feelings and emotion to someone like me that could, to some people listening, come across as heartless?
Okay, well, there's a few things. And one is a question. I have a question. I'm going to ask you
Yeah.
to pause in answering it until I answer the other part of your question. So, the question I have for you is you said you're old school. So, people do a job, they get paid to do the job, they do the job. So the question I'm going to have for you, but again, pause on your response, is how is that old school? What's old school about that? Because to me, that still holds true today. But now I'm going to answer the other part of your question. And that is about people expressing emotions to a person like you who doesn't necessarily relate very much to emotion. And what I would say to you about that is we are all different. And part of what makes the human species so amazing is the fact that we are all so different. We're different in the way we process cognitively, emotionally, neurologically, in every which way. And there's nothing wrong with who and how you are. And you don't need to try to change to accommodate or to be like anybody else. And at the same time, a person like you can also have an understanding that we're so different. And while you're not emotional, other people are. Humans have emotions. It's just some people are more aware of them, some people aren't. But that's the way humans are designed. So a person like you who doesn't experience a lot of that or relate to it can also have a knowledge and an understanding at a cognitive level that some other people do. And inside of that, the other people have a need to express that. So you can create the space, a safe space for people to express what they need to express in a respectful, kind, and compassionate way without you then having a need or an obligation to do anything with that other than to just hear it, acknowledge it. Thank you for sharing that. I hear that you're very frustrated, whatever. You're very sad about that. Thank you for sharing that. Is there any support that you need with that maybe I can't provide, but maybe I can find somebody who can? So you can actually approach people's emotions from a more intellectual, cognitive standpoint if that's how you operate. But it doesn't have to be this either or, like you're either emotional and you can hear people's emotions or you're not. But it can be this yes and environment where you're perfectly fine the way you are, they're perfectly fine the way they are. And how do we make that work together without anybody being wrong for who they are?
Would there be any expectations that I need to share my emotions too?
No. And you know what? Thank you so much, Susie, for sharing that with me. I'm really hearing how this situation affected you. It affected me as well. It's not something I really talk about, but thank you so much for sharing it with me. They would go, okay, because you're not wrong and you're not wrong. So how about if we create these situations, environments where people can just be, and support each other and create safe space for each other without always having to be like each other. It's really not that hard if the awareness and the willingness is there. You don't even need to have empathy, because if I go to you and I say, Risa, and I pour my heart out to you, and it's landing like a weather report, like you just don't get it. Like some people just don't get it. Like they hear all this emotion and they're like, I see that you're affected by this, but I just don't get it. Like maybe you don't have empathy for it. And that's okay too, but you can have respect for it. You can have a cognitive understanding that they're experiencing something that you don't get, and then that it's okay for them to be experiencing it, and it's okay for you to not get it, and you can still hold space for them to share it.
Okay. I can dig that. I can do that.
All right.
Slowly. The water is still, preventing me from coming over. All right. Okay. You asked me a question. What's different today than it was back then? I think expectations are different. I think that we ask someone to do a job, and it almost, I look at it as like my kids. You ask them to clean their room. There's always an issue to clean their room. They can do part of it, but not all. And then it becomes, oh, this is more than what I signed up for, or this job's too hard, or you're not paying me enough to do this job, even though this is part of the job description that we all agreed on. What I'm saying, like the job sometimes is just too hard for people.
Yeah.
And then when suddenly we need to make accommodations to make it easier, and then outsource some of those responsibilities, pay them more to do that.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that come to my mind there, like with multiple issues. Like, first of all, kids today are messy. Kids 20 years ago were messy. Kids 40 years ago were messy, right? So I think what they're messy with, maybe the way they talk is different because every generation is different. But some of the things, and I think a generation, no matter when in time, always looks at the younger people like, kids these days.
Yeah.
But the reality is that my daughter is 16 and she's quite messy and it's very annoying. And when I was 16, I was quite messy and it was probably very annoying. I haven't asked my mom and I probably won't, but I know it was annoying. And so there's some ways that some things really haven't changed. I think the expression of it has changed. Now, when it comes to the workplace, there's a few different things to me that are completely separate issues that you brought up. Part of it is people are more outspoken about what they need and when things are hard than they used to be. We used to just shut up and deal with it. The reality is that in vet med, it is really hard, right? Being a veterinarian, being a veterinary technician, being a veterinary CSR, veterinary assistant is actually really, really hard in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's an amazing profession. I wouldn't trade my career for anything. And there were times it was really hard. Every profession has its own culture. Every culture has its generational conversations. And this profession from generations, decades upon decades ago, started out with some very unhealthy practices, unhealthy norms, unhealthy expectations of things that you do, things you sacrifice, everything you have to know, everything you have to do. Like, it's ridiculous what a veterinarian has to know and do across species, across disciplines. So I think that in some ways that people are now standing up and saying, enough, like, this is too much. Instead of just sitting by and going through an entire career in misery, they're starting to stand up and say, this is unreasonable. This is too hard. This is too much for how much I get paid. That's actually a really good thing. But like all change, there's times the pendulum swings too far, and then it may swing back a little too far, and then sometimes it like lands in the middle. And so there, I'm sure, are isolated circumstances where people are still grinning and bearing it and just dealing with it. And there are circumstances where people are going way the other direction and they complain about everything and everything's too hard, right? But the happy medium somewhere in the middle is actually what works. Yes, this is a difficult profession. Again, bringing intentionality, bringing consciousness to our choices. If you choose to step into this profession, you are choosing. My favorite metaphor is that I used to say when I was earlier in my career, I'd remind myself this. I'd say, Jen, you chose to go to veterinary school. You chose to open a practice. And now you're bitching about it? It's like jumping in the swimming pool and then complaining that your clothes are wet. There are certain characteristics that are just inherent in this profession. It just is. And at the same time, what can we as a culture, we as a group do to start to mitigate some of the dysfunctionality and some of the excessive difficulty that has come along the way? So I kind of see both sides of the story, and I think there's a happy medium in there somewhere.
I like the way you explained that. It did give me a different perspective. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're getting closer.
Keep firing at me. I'll keep trying.
We're getting closer. I love it. Jen, where can people find you?
So I am findable on my website, which is drjenniferedwards.com, and that's doctor with a DR. Also on LinkedIn and other social platforms, but I mostly hang out on LinkedIn. It's at Dr. Jennifer Edwards. I invite people to reach out. I do private coaching, leadership coaching. I do team development, public speaking, all the fun things. And if any of your listeners would like a really great resource, if you visit my website, as soon as you open my website, a pop-up appears that allows you to download my Conscious Leadership Compass. And it is a resource that will allow you in a moment to take a look at how you're reacting to something. It will give you specific action to take to move you more towards a conscious approach to it. So that's free, and everybody's welcome to download that.
What's the website?
drjenniferedwards.com.
Nice. Anything on the horizon that people should look out for?
Lots of things on the horizon. I've got my podcast, which is the Resilient Vet podcast that I co-host with Erin Shaw. People can check me out there. I'll be speaking at the AVMA convention. I'm doing an on-demand. If you're an ACVIM member going to that conference, I'll be having an on-demand webinar from their on-demand program, and that is about sustainable wellness in veterinary medicine. Some other events, other podcasts, so just keep up on LinkedIn and you can find me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Edwards, for joining me today. You and I are bar buddies at every conference that we go to.
Yes.
An absolute hoot with the grouping and clan. You are a Vet Partners member, and so am I. We hang out a lot. I love your company. As I said, your smile, your presence immediately puts me to calm, and that's why I need another drink to get away from you, because otherwise just too calm. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you again, dear.
Thank you for having me and for challenging me. I love this conversation. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Bye.
And thanks for joining me on the Vet Story Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. If you want to come on the show to share your story or knowledge, email me, Rhys, RHYS, at ivmsolutions.org. This podcast is brought to you by IVMS, Innovative Veterinary Management Solutions. If you're a private practice owner or manager and find that the wheels are spinning with little to no direction or profits, or even if your culture is struggling, give me a shout. This is exactly what I help practices fix. I even offer the only money-back guarantee that exists in our industry today. Practice ownership should not be this hard. Visit ivmsolutions.org to learn more. Until next time, take care.